Hi, I'm James McGuire, and on today's eSpeaks, we're talking about the concept of data mesh. We're looking at why more companies are adopting data mesh, and we're also discussing how to operationalize data mesh. To provide insight, I'm joined by two industry experts. With me is Anna Mate, Senior Director, leading the Customer Solutions Architecture space for Capital One Software. Anna, thanks for joining us today.
Hello, James. Thank you for having me.
Anna, please tell us about what you're focused on at Capital One Software. What sort of projects do you normally lead?
Oh, happy to. First of all, thank you for inviting me to participate in this conversation alongside Vishal here from Pitney as we share our perspectives and experiences in this space. I've been with Capital One Software for about 2 years now, and Capital One Software, for those of you who don't know, it is a brand new enterprise B2B line of business of Capital One, which is focused on providing data management solutions for companies operating in the cloud. So as you mentioned, I do lead the customer solutions architecture space for Capital One Software. And specifically, my team is focusing now on our first ever officially launched product by Capital One Software called Slingshot, which is focused on enabling businesses to maximize their Snowflake investment at a very high level. Mm-hmm. So as part of that role, I do focus on working directly with our prospect and existing customers to help them identify and understand which challenging aspects of the data management ecosystem can be addressed by some of our solutions that we develop at Capital One Software.
Sounds good. And as you mentioned, we are joined by Vishal Shah, Data Architect Manager at Pitney Bowes. Vishal, good to have you on board today.
Thank you very much, James, and thanks, Anna, for the introduction also. So as James mentioned, I'm Vishal Shah from Pitney Bowes. I've been with Pitney Bowes for about 23 years now and going. I'm actually in charge of various data-related solutions, whether it's data analytics solutions or data engineering solutions. I've been working with data all my life. From the time I started working in the computer industry, I've always been working with data. So, the whole data journey of Pitney Bowes, I was a very active part of that. And then a few years before, like a couple of years back, we actually came to our data mesh journey where we moved our architecture to a data mesh related architecture. And we have got some significant benefit from that architecture. And, I play one of a core role in making sure that architecture is completely managed, governed within the Pitney Bowes realm. So thank you very much for having me.
Sure. All right, so let's dig into the topic of data mesh. I've certainly seen data mesh get a lot more attention recently. The question is why? Why are companies moving toward data mesh architecture? What's the advantage of a traditional data infrastructure? Anna, your thoughts here?
That's a great question, James, and very timely for sure. And I think there's a lot to unpack here. So let's dive into this space a little bit. I would like to first start by just setting the stage with what data mesh is, right? At its core, and just in the most simple terms, it is an architectural concept, but also a paradigm shift that distributes the handling of data in an organization to the individual lines of business or domains or individual teams. So in other words, it is a new approach to managing and distributing data within large organizations. So in that sense, data mesh departs from the traditional approach of centralizing data responsibilities under one large data team, and instead allows companies to access and analyze data at scale. So the core idea here being that decentralizing data ownership and management across the organization by treating that data as a product. So data mesh, in my opinion, has emerged as an important framework to help companies scale in a well-managed cloud data ecosystem in a complex data environment in which volumes and sources of data are growing exponentially by the day. There are 4 main principles that support the data mesh architecture that I would like to just run through real quick at a super high level. First one being data as a product. So think of this as data teams applying product thinking to their data sets. So in other words, an organization can assign a product owner to a data and apply the same rigorous product principles to data assets to provide real value to its end consumers. So these data products should be developed, versioned, and managed as a software would be. The second principle being data ownership. And this translates into data ownership being federated among domain experts who are responsible for producing assets for analysis and business intelligence. The third one being the self-service data platforms principle. In other words, this would be a central platform that would handle the underlying infrastructure needs of processing data while providing the tools necessary for a domain-specific autonomy. And last but not least, the federated computational governance principle of data mesh, which essentially translates into a universal set of centrally defined standards that ensure conformity to data quality, security, policy compliance across all these different data domains and data owners. So with that baseline being established of what data mesh is and its key principles, now I'm going to go back to your why question, James. And I would say that there are at least three main reasons why companies are moving towards a data mesh architecture, in my perspective. In no particular order, I would say scalability and agility, as the domain teams within this construct can respond quickly to changing business requirements without centralized data teams for every related task, which typically adds a lot of delays and bottlenecks. I would say the other main reason would be reduced data silos, which has historically plagued teams in traditional architectures. So by promoting data as a product approach, each domain can take ownership of the data and make it available for consumption by other teams. And last but not least, I would say the third reason, in my opinion, would be the empowerment of domain experts to manage all of the products in their business units independently without having to rely on centralized data engineering teams.
On that very
James, I would like to add a couple of things to what Anna said,
please.
Complementing to what Anna said, not that much technical, but even on a very, very basic level for people to understand data mesh. It's like a lot of people, are moving to the cloud, and normally their journey to the cloud is centralize all the data in one place so that people can use it. But very soon they realize that centralizing the data in one place means that there's one team which is managing all the data. So there's when those teams are contacted for various kinds of analytical solutions, operational solutions, there's resource constraint. That team alone cannot do everything. That team does not know how the data is being used. That team does not know what is the business that this data is going to be used for. So when data mesh came in and when it was introduced, the whole purpose of that was to basically take that ownership from one central team doing all the data related activity and create a cross-functional team, which will consist of the actual data person, the engineer itself. There'll be a BI person, which is a business analyst. There would be a dashboarding person, which actually takes the data and creates dashboard. There'll be data owners, so people who are actually generating the data. And what this does, this cross-functional team will then do is, it will basically, they'll come together and come up with a data set or data product, as Anna mentioned, to make it available for people to use. And the whole beauty of that is that any person in the team now knows what the data is, where it is coming from, how it is being used, and what is the impact on it. Not one person needs to be always contacted saying, how do I get the data? Or not one person has to be told, how do I use the data? Because the team is already consisting of all those. So there is knowledge sharing within the team. And there's also responsibility, like ownership of the whole team instead of one person or one team owning it. So at a very basic level, that's what data mesh gives. It gives you the control on what people are consuming, the control on how you will publish something and how people will consume it, and what is the impact it's going to create. Like and the data governance portion that Anna mentioned, that assists this whole piece by ensuring that there's full audit control on what is being generated and what has been published by documenting it, setting up observability, setting up data quality metrics. So that governance helps people to make sure that what you're publishing is always audited, basically, and becomes a trustworthy system.
Well, Vishal, it seems like a big aspect of this is the self-service aspect, because it's going to democratize access to the data and enable a company to move much faster.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's a very, very good point. It does help democratize the data, because now when you make the data as a product, you can now ensure that all the disciplines and principles that you introduce in any kind of product, you take care in the data and the data space also. You are basically ensuring that the data which is being published is complete, it's fully trustworthy, it is documented, and it has full audit control on it, saying that if something goes wrong, people are automatically notified. There's full automation, and then there's also the self-serve piece of that data product, makes this data product available to other people without even contacting someone. You can actually subscribe to the data product and start using it. So that is the beauty of that. Self-serve is definitely a big piece of the data mesh.
All right, let's talk about the data mesh journeys at Capital One and at Pitney Bowes. How did data mesh evolve for your respective companies? Anna, how did data mesh evolve at Capital One?
Before I speak about the specific data mesh journey at Capital One, I just want to take a step back and just provide a little bit of context about our broader Capital One journey and kind of how we got to deciding data mesh was right for us.
Good.
So Capital One has undergone a journey to reimagine our entire data ecosystem for the opportunities and demands of managing data in the cloud. So back in 2017, we began by modernizing our data ecosystem in the cloud, by building our data infrastructure, storage, and the processes supporting these aspects from a cloud-first perspective, which included the adoption of Snowflake as our data cloud platform. Mm-hmm. So the cloud provided access to data from more sources, but at the same time, we encountered challenges in managing this exponential growth in data that was stored in different places and meeting at the same time the demands of all the users with all the different use cases across the board, which you would typically encounter in a large organization like Capital One. So early on in that journey, we applied the product management and user-centered design principles to solve some of our initial data management challenges. And in taking this approach, we actually learned that there were many players working together in our data ecosystem, and scaling this very intricate ecosystem actually meant that all these different groups and all these different users needed to work together seamlessly. So we noticed that there were different data experiences for all these different groups and users across publishing, across consumption, governance, infrastructure management. And some of these user experiences included, for example, those individuals responsible for publishing high quality data to a shared environment. It included business analysts, data scientists that were looking to use the data to inform their business decisions. There were people focused on enforcing data governance policies across the company to keep us in check. And there were teams managing the infrastructure that made all of these use cases possible. So if you think about all these different use cases and needs, this was the perfect combination to create room for miscommunication and creating point-in-time solutions by having these units siloed in managing their experiences. So how does this all tie into the data mesh concept, you may ask, James? Well, by going through this exercise, we took away a lot of learnings that we actually used to inform the way in which we designed and operationalized data mesh at Capital One. So we knew we wanted to give greater ownership over data to our lines of business, but without sacrificing the important company standards and compliance policies for data. So this led us to a two-pronged approach to operationalize data mesh, which consisted of centralizing policy through tools that were built into a central platform and enabling the federation of data management across all of our lines of business. So just to give you an understanding of what these two buckets are, for the centralization aspect of the work that was done, we first broke out our lines of business into organizations and units of specific data responsibility with their own hierarchy, and each organization across the board had the same exact set of roles supporting their data needs. We then defined a common enterprise-wide standard for metadata curation, right? Because not all data is created equal. So for example, in our case at Capital One, the data that was used in regulatory reports required a much different standard of governance than, for example, the data that was in the staging tables. We also defined the data quality standards for the shared data sets. So we used a very fine balance of a sloped governance approach, which increased the governance controls around access and security for each of these data buckets. So for example, production data needed to pass a more rigorous set of data quality checks, right, than data that a user may store in their private user spaces. We also defined entitlement patterns based on data sensitivity. So what we learned early in our journey was that each data set was protected by its own entitlement, which led to our users taking days, if not weeks, to figure out the right permission to request to obtain the specific data set. But then only to find out that 66% of the time, the data that they wanted was either poor quality or it wasn't at all what they needed. So we tried to solve this issue by creating what we call the business organization sensitivity combination, which means that a user could access all non-sensitive data across the board in one place and only submit a new request for access when escalating permissions. And last but not least, shocker, we had to make this easy, right? For both data practitioners to follow, as well as the data governance teams to enforce. Because we found that the vast majority of folks really wanted to do the right thing and be a good corporate steward, but all of the confusing and opaque policies that we had prevented them from getting there. So these are some of the key steps we took for the centralization aspect. And then for the federation aspect, one of the main concepts of data mesh is the federation of ownership, which is the idea that the ownership of data as a product should lie with the person who actually knows the data best, right? The expert. So a key step to federating the data management responsibly was in providing what we call a usability layer that was oriented by the jobs that needed to be done rather than a capability of the product, like data cataloging or data quality. So when we defined these jobs to be done, we focused on publishing data as a new data product, protecting sensitive data, reconciling an infrastructure bill. These all became jobs to be done. So to solve this, we created the self-service user-specific experience layer for like data producer, consumers, risk managers, business data owners, platform owners, and so forth, to enable them to get the jobs done. So through this approach, we were able to actually create more accountability for the data quality, improve the discovery of the data, and actually build greater data trust across the board in our organization.
Anna, it sounds like there's a lot to unpack there. One thing I'd like you to unpack a little bit further are those 4 user experiences you just mentioned.
Yeah, definitely. It's a lot to unpack there because operationalizing data mesh it's not a small project, and that doesn't take a small amount of effort. So as I was describing the federation aspect of our 2-pronged approach for operationalizing data mesh, I was mentioning how we enabled self-service for data user-specific experiences. And the 4 experiences that I mentioned were the data producer, the data consumer, the risk manager, and the business data platform owner. So just to explain a little bit more what these user experiences are, when you think about the data producer, these are those individuals responsible for pushing a new data product. And for these types of users, we enabled a self-service data producer experience that empowered our lines of business to manage their own data. The second user experience that I mentioned is the data consumer. So typically in a large organization with hundreds of thousands of tables, it can be difficult for analysts and data scientists to find and trust and even get access to the data they need. So we enabled this self-service data consuming experience so that these consumers could go to one place to discover, evaluate, and get access to the data they need. The third bucket that I mentioned is the risk manager user experience. So this experience is for those individuals defining and enforcing data protection policies, risk policies, security policies, and we enabled an experience that could make them feel confident knowing that the automation of the governance was in place through these custom workflows and dynamic warehouse provisioning. So these workflows ensured a fully auditable purge process and the ability to properly make changes to the data in a production environment. And last but not least, it was the business data platform owner experience. So data mesh does not only require federation of data, but also the federation of the infrastructure supporting the data and these processes as well. So for those individuals charged with managing infrastructure provisioning and cost, we provided self-service tools that were focused at optimizing the cloud costs while effectively scaling cloud data. And actually for this last user experience, I will say this, we brought this specific capability to market with Slingshot, which is the product that I mentioned earlier in our conversation, and is actually a product that can give companies the building blocks for data mesh and building their own data mesh journey. So I mentioned that Slingshot is focused on helping companies make the best on the Snowflake investment, but at the same time, it's also a product that can help with those building blocks for data mesh.
Vishal, what about on your end? How did Pitney Bowes evolve with data mesh? What was your experience?
Yeah, so you would be surprised. Actually, our journey actually also started in 2016, where we moved to the cloud first, where we wanted to move all our on-premise data onto the cloud. And the main vision behind that was that instead of 10 different teams using this doing ETL and getting the data on their own and then creating a siloed solution, we wanted to have the data pulled in from each of the source system once into a data lake, and then give people access to that one source data so that they can, all the people are looking at one version of the data. They are not doing their own ETL, their own transformation. It's all done one time and exposed it. So we started with the centralized data lake, and then we loaded all that centralized data into Snowflake to be used towards analytical use cases. But then very soon we realized that having one team do all the work of getting the data, transforming it, putting it into Snowflake, creating aggregations for analysts to use, it was becoming a lot of resource constraint. And plus, all those people did not have full knowledge of the business portion of the data. Sorry. So they basically allowed, when we created the whole data mesh architecture, we ensured that the engineers, the BI person, the analysts, they all come together. We have we create a cross-functional team recurring meeting, which they meet on a regular cadence to see what the data is, how the data is being used, who are the consumers of the data, what is the business impact of creating this data product. So that team basically will make a collective decision. And because that team involves people from different experiences related to the different parts of the business, it made that data product that much more efficient, because then that data product that we are publishing, we clearly know the business impact of that data. So we could then technically monetize that piece, that, okay, if we use this data, we know that the solutions coming out of it. And we were able to create some very, very high efficient solutions like predictive analytics, like operational efficiencies, like revenue growth analytics. We did a lot of those kind of work using the data coming out of the data mesh. And our journey also, like as Anna said, started in 2016 into going to the cloud. And by 2018, we were in full cloud. 95-96% of the data was in the cloud. And then in 2019-20 timeframe, we started investing in our data mesh. And that's where all the initial portion, we also, in fact, I just forgot to mention one more thing. We also have a data governance committee that we have created. And that committee consists of people from various business units who basically come up with different kind of policies that we are going to implement on this data mesh. Those policies include how are we treating sensitive data? That policy includes how are we going to transform the data into data products? That policy would include how people are going to access the data, like what kind of access does each person need to get. So those are the things that that data governance committee used to basically make the decision on. And again, the data governance committee, like the cross-function team, also used to meet in a regular cadence so that everyone is keep up to date. And then all this information that we are sharing is all fully documented in our Confluence pages and in our document system, so that new people coming up will basically be able to look at that and pretty much connect to the system immediately. And these committees or these teams, they are not constant. So you could have me as a part of one team doing one data product. Once I've finished that work, I can still go to another data product, but I'm still the accountable person of the first data domain. So my accountability does not stop once the data domain is published. My accountability will always remain with it, but I might be able to work on multiple data domains at the same time. So that what that gave is that automatically gave that internal knowledge sharing between in the company. You no longer need to have that individual training because people can interact with each other and get that information. So that was our journey basically.
So I think there's probably a lot of companies wondering, is data mesh an optimal solution for every company? Anna, what's your opinion on this?
Data mesh right now may not be the right answer for everyone. I think when considering data mesh as an approach, I would encourage companies to think about a few key aspects to make that determination. I think they should understand how complex and how vast their data inventory is, because data mesh is best suited for companies dealing with significant data complexity and scale. So I'm talking about organizations where the data landscape is growing rapidly with diverse data sources, complex data models, and multiple data consumers across the various domains, as well as data producers. I also think that they should ask themselves if their organization is a domain-centric business structure, because data mesh does align very well with organizations where different domains or business units have distinct responsibilities and are relatively autonomous in nature. So each domain may have unique data needs and specialized knowledge about their specific data. So if a business already operates in this fashion, making the transition to a data mesh architecture could probably be a good fit for the use case. And I also think that if they need to ask themselves if they have truly an innovative culture that adopts change quickly. So a successful data mesh implementation does require a strong commitment to collaboration and a cultural shift in some cases. So if an organization isn't willing to foster a collaborative culture where data is a shared asset, it might be challenging for them to implement. So I think these are some of the key aspects they could consider when determining if that's a good solution for them.
And I'd like to add one more thing, James. It also is determined by the size of the company. Like if you have a very small engineering team supporting a few data sets into it, it does not make sense to actually create that whole architecture, because you're not going to get that kind of benefit and then sometimes in a smaller company, having this separation out, as I was mentioning, people may not be always open to it, because it is definitely a way to work differently than what you're used to doing it. So, an engineer told that, okay, he's doing this engineering work only, and now he's told he's no longer an engineer alone. He has to work with the analyst to create the aggregation. He has to work with the reporting person to make sure the reports come out. So he needs to know other things. And that change, as Anna was mentioning, is very important. If people are open to that change, then it becomes easier to implement. And with a smaller company or even a startup, they don't have that big a team to actually utilize the benefit. I'm not saying they cannot do it. It's just that they may not get the same kind of benefit that data mesh provides, basically.
Sure, makes sense. So there may be a learning curve involved here. So what are the common issues and challenges that companies encounter as they operationalize data mesh? And here's really the big question. How do you recommend addressing these challenges? Vishal, what advice do you give?
So as I said in my earlier conversation, it basically, you need to see first that is the data that you are publishing, is it, you have lots of data that multiple teams want to use it. That is the first criteria you take, that, okay, this data is going to be used by my 5 different teams. And these are kind of solutions they are building on top of it. Once you know what that use case is on that data and what is the business impact of the data, that's where you can decide whether, that's where you can decide how to create that domain-centric data. Now, the challenges that they may face, initial challenges that they might face, is basically to, first of all, have that culture that you want to have a cross-functional team across different business units. Because a lot of times in very, very large companies, different business units don't talk to each other as a small company. In a small company, the small knitted team, they talk to each other very frequently. But in a very large company, you'll have people separated out in time zones, people separated out in different functional roles. They may not talk to each other, or they may not be very much open to it. So that's where the culture has to come up right from the top to say that this is the vision that we are going to have. And that's where you can use it. So those are some of the challenges that you would have to encounter, the person will encounter. But what I have seen, at least from my experience, is that if you have the top level executive backing on things that you're doing, you can show the vision of what you're trying to achieve out of it. A lot of people will accept it, because they know that this not only will help them in their own area, but it will also help the overall organization to come with a common goal. And you're also part of a stronger team now. It's you doing things on your own in your own silo. You're now part of a team where your work will be directly responsible against an impact which will get created. So that is something which it's huge. Once you once you overcome that, then that's where you get all the benefit.
Mm-hmm. Anna, what advice
Yeah,
do you give companies to operationalize data mesh?
I was just about to say that, Vishal, I agree with all the things that you called out. I would probably add a few more, and I'm a huge fan of bucketing things in groups of three. So I'm going to choose the three key challenges that I think are most prevalent. So one being around data governance and standardization. It's also something we have learned through our journey at Capital One, and I've heard other companies talk about it as well, which basically ensures that there is consistency across the different domains for how governance is established, is standardized, and it's enforced across the board. So to address this challenge, I would recommend companies ensure that they have a very well and clear established governance framework that has been aligned on by all the different stakeholders and teams involved through collaboration, and also have regular means of communication through like governance committees or any other shared methodologies of communication or documentation. Another challenge, I think, is monitoring and observability, right? So data flows have always been an issue across the board, and it's hard to build really robust data flows. And in a data mesh architecture, they can become amplified. So if you have multiple data products and the domain teams involved, which can lead to that complexity, it just keeps adding to the challenge. So to address that, I think sometimes an investment is needed in a centralized monitoring solution that can provide that visibility and those insights into your data product usage, into your data pipeline performance, into your data quality, system health, you name it. So I think this should help identify those bottlenecks and other challenges early enough to ensure smooth operations across the data mesh. And finally, the third, I would say, would be data product lifecycle management. So as the number of products in an organization grows, it can naturally be challenging to manage the versioning, deprecation, retirement, keeping up to date all of these different data products. So to address this challenge, I think companies would need to foster an ability for their data teams to operate in a simple fashion, just like DevOps teams, if we were to make a comparison, who are used to continuous improvement, continuous development style of like software pipelining, just like in software engineering. I find that those types of principles also work very well with product management.
Anna, is there an answer to the question, how long does it take to set up data mesh, or does it really depend on the company and their data infrastructure?
It definitely depends on the company and their data infrastructure. There's no one fixed timeline for every single company.
Yeah, a data mesh is not a silver bullet. You cannot just buy it from somewhere and start implementing it. It's not a tool. You cannot buy a tool and say, start doing it, unlike other things where you can. But it's like, as I said, that, the benefits that you're getting, if you do implement it, are huge, if done correctly. Now, people have actually come back saying, I have implemented it, but I'm not seeing that benefit. There could be multiple reasons. One of the reasons could be they may not have done it in the way it's supposed to be done. They may have, in order to fast track the piece, they may have cut down certain areas, which is prudent for the data mesh to work. And that's where things go off, and then they say, oh, data mesh is not working. Because when I've got that experience, a lot of people have asked me, how much time did it take for your company to do it? And I'll tell you, we invested a significant amount of time initially, purely because for us, it was a huge undertaking because the amount of data that we bring in. So we took around 6 to 8 months actually to actually start the initial infrastructure, get all the policies and procedures set up, like how we are going to create a data domain, how we are going to create a data product, how are the cross-function teams going to get created, what would be the recurring cadence, what would the data governance committee do, what are the policies that are going to be implemented. We did a lot of legwork before we started even implementing it. So that basically, as I said, that not many companies will be able to spend that much time, and that's where if they cut route and start doing it, then there are chances that it may not work. But that does not mean a data mesh itself is not a feasible solution.
Right. And in all reality, it is a concept that it's not, said and done. It's something that will continue to evolve over time as technology evolves, as processes evolve, as data needs evolve. There's a lot of continuous changing across the board in this ecosystem that I don't believe data mesh is a concept that has a specific timeline from start to finish. You started, but then it continuously evolves in time with your business needs and grows with you to serve your purpose.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about key takeaways. What are the key takeaways you want companies looking to implement data mesh to walk away with? Really the bottom line. Vishal, what's most important here?
If they have multiple teams using the data to create solutions, say using the same data and creating different solutions, it makes sense to use a data mesh architecture so that they have one way to look at the data in the because what we had saw, one of the things that we had saw which gave us a big benefit was people are looking at the data and creating a report. Two teams are looking at the same data and creating a report, but both are giving different result. Same data, but different result. Now we cannot say any one of them is wrong because both of them are doing their own kind of logic on the data. So technically both of their report is right, but to an executive, they'll say, okay, which number should I trust? With the data mesh piece, because those teams are all coming together to generate that product, which is going to be eventually used on that on the dashboard, that product will then be having a single result going out with all the information. So then it's one single source of truth of everything. I think I would say that's the term I would use, that data mesh allows you to get a single source of truth on your data, which is trustworthy.
Mm-hmm. Anna, what are the key takeaways in your view? What do companies really need to know?
I would say that based on all the different principles and examples and shared stories that we discussed here, if I were to summarize, I think companies can take away 3 key things to focus on if they're looking to implement data mesh. I think first and foremost, they have to determine if data mesh is truly the right approach for their organization. And we talked about a few ways they can do that earlier in our conversation. If they determine it's the right approach for them, I would recommend to start early, because starting early does reduce some of the complexity and level of effort required to potentially retrofit existing products in this new paradigm and this new concept. And last but not least, I would definitely recommend using a similar 2-prong approach as Capital One did, where they would build this like central policy and central tooling that will then enable a federated data management, because data mesh remains just a concept unless these organizations can provide self-service tools and automated workflows to operationalize this federated ownership of data that we've been talking about.
Mm-hmm. What about if companies want to learn more on it? Where should they go to learn more online?
Well, first and foremost, I want to thank you for having us here, James. This has been really fun, and I actually thoroughly enjoyed this conversation today. And Vishal, thank you to you as well for joining this conversation with me. Listeners can learn more about data mesh or about all the things that Capital One Software is up to at capitalone.com/software.
Vishal, Anna, thanks for joining us today, and I hope you come back and talk with us again sometime.
Thank you so much,
James.
James. Have a good day. Thank you.